Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the century-old blueprint for the ultimate enemies-to-lovers romance. We're looking at the totally iconic journey of Anne Shirley and Gilbert Blythe from L.M. Montgomery's classic Anne of Green Gables series. I mean, if you've ever swooned over a story where two bitter rivals eventually figure out they're actually soulmates, well, you owe a massive debt to the foundation laid by these two characters. So let's just dive right into this incredible dynamic.
Let's kick things off with this wonderfully melodramatic vow. I shall never forgive Gilbert Blythe. The iron has entered into my soul. This was actually uttered by an 11-year-old Anne Shirley, and honestly, it perfectly sets the stage for a spectacular feud. Remember, Anne was a deeply sensitive orphan who had finally just found a real home at Green Gables, and her imagination kind of demanded that life be as dramatic as the romantic poetry she loved reading. So when she felt slighted, she went all in.
So this brings us to the core question of our explainer today. How did literature's most bitter childhood feud become its most beloved romance? We're going to trace the evolution of Anne and Gilbert's relationship to see exactly why their dynamic still resonates so powerfully with audiences today, over 100 years later. As you'll see, it's not just some quick flip from hate to love. No, it's a real slow burn built on a foundation of mutual respect.
But to understand the love, we first got to understand the hate. Chapter 1, The Infamous Carrots Incident, where the enmity began.
Okay, so here's exactly how this absolute disaster unfolded at the Avonlea school. First off, you've got Gilbert, who's a bit of a tease and really not used to a girl ignoring him. He pulls Anne's red braid and loudly whispers, "Carrots." Step 2, Anne, who is incredibly sensitive about her red hair, immediately springs up and literally smashes her slate right over his head. And then, step 3, the teacher, Mr. Phillips, punishes Anne by forcing her to sit next to Gilbert. This hilariously disastrous sequence of events completely humiliated her. She instantly categorized the handsome, teasing Gilbert as a permanent villain in the dramatic story of her life.
Now, what's really fascinating about Anne is how her vivid imagination demanded these, extreme categories for people. You had your bosom friend, someone like her neighbor Diana Barry, who received Anne's unyielding, romanticized loyalty. They swore oaths of friendship, they traded locks of hair, the whole shebang. But if you weren't a kindred spirit, you could very easily become an eternal enemy. Gilbert was firmly boxed into that enemy category and completely shut out of her affections.
But here's the absolutely crucial point. Gilbert wasn't actually a bad guy. He tried, repeatedly, to make amends. He whispered, "I'm awfully sorry," as she left school. Later on, he secretly slipped a pink candy heart reading "You are sweet" onto her desk. And what did Anne do? She took that candy heart, dropped it on the floor, and ground it to powder beneath her heel without even looking at him. Gilbert's genuine apologies were constantly met with Anne's fierce, stubborn pride. She absolutely refused to let go of that grudge.
Since Anne flat out refused to be friends, the relationship morphed into something else entirely. Chapter 2, A Fierce Academic Rivalry, Trading the Top Spot.
Let's look at their teenage years. They were just brilliantly matched in intellect. Anne would wrestle wildly with decimals just to beat him, showing this unyielding tenacity. Meanwhile, Gilbert was 2 years older, he had traveled a bit, and was the established class leader. They were true peers, constantly trading the top spot in class. One day, Gilbert's name would be at the top of the honor roll, and the very next day, Anne would toss her red braids and spell him down. They constantly pushed each other to excel, creating this surprisingly deep bond even while they weren't speaking to each other.
This whole rivalry eventually hit a boiling point at Queen's Academy, where they were battling for the single most prestigious prize available. There was only one Avery scholarship to be won, and the stakes could not have been higher for their futures. After a grueling year of study, Anne triumphantly snagged that #1 spot, beating Gilbert for the top prize.
But even with all those academic victories, their personal relationship was just completely frozen. Which begs the question, would Anne's stubborn pride keep them apart forever? Because even after a terrifying incident where Anne was trapped on a bridge pile after her boat literally sank in a pond, and Gilbert rode right up to rescue her, she still said no to him. He begged for her friendship again, and she haughtily rejected the offer, letting the memory of being called carrots dictate her future. It really leaves us wondering if she would ever let go of the past.
But life has a funny way of shifting our perspectives when we least expect it. Chapter 3, Forgiveness and New Friendship, The Turning Point. Everything really changed with an ultimate sacrifice. When Matthew Cuthbert, Anne's beloved adoptive father, passes away suddenly after a bank failure, Anne makes the heartbreaking decision to give up her hard-won college scholarship.
She decides to stay at Green Gables and care for Marilla, whose eyesight is failing. Hearing this, Gilbert secretly goes to the school board and gives up his local Avonlea teaching post so Anne can have it. He takes a harder position out in White Sands for himself, just so Anne can stay close to home.
It was just an incredible act of selfless kindness. When Anne finds out, she finally stops Gilbert on the road and thanks him. He asks if they can finally be friends, and she admits she's been sorry since that day at the pond. And just like that, the 5-year feud completely dissolves. As Anne beautifully tells Marilla, we have 5 years lost conversations to catch up with. They transition from bitter rivals to profound, devoted friends.
So now that they're friends, things actually get a bit trickier. Chapter 4, From Friends to True Love, the Redmond College Years.
You'd think it would be smooth sailing from here, right? Well, wrong. When Gilbert proposes for the first time, Anne actually calls the idea grotesque or horrible. Despite sharing moments with obvious romantic undertones, like wandering through the haunted wood tasting wild apples together, Anne rejects him. Why? Because her vision of love was still deeply rooted in sentimental childhood fantasies. She was holding out for a tall, dark, and handsome prince, and her familiar, trusted best friend, Gilbert, just didn't fit that melodramatic, fictional mold.
It takes something seriously drastic to snap Anne out of this fantasy, a literal near-death experience. While Anne is away, she receives word that Gilbert has fallen deathly ill with typhoid fever. Sitting alone in a room at Green Gables, absolutely terrified of losing him, the veil is finally lifted. She drops her romantic illusions and realizes that her deep connection and friendship with Gilbert is, in fact, true love. She had loved him all along.
Once Gilbert recovers, he proposes again, and this time she joyfully accepts. But look at this timeline mapping out the steady road of their young adulthood. Year 1, they reconcile. By year 4, they're studying together at Redmond College. Year 5 is the second proposal. And they don't actually get married until year 8, after a full 3-year engagement while Gilbert finishes medical school. What you should really take away from this is that their romance was not rushed, at all. It was built on a solid foundation of time, personal growth, and really deep mutual respect.
Let's look at the destination of this incredible journey. Chapter 5, A Lifelong Bond. Equals in life and love.
Because getting together isn't the end of the story, it's just the beginning. The Blythe family legacy is honestly just beautiful. They get married right at Green Gables, the place where Anne's life truly began. They live in homes they affectionately name the House of Dreams and Ingleside. Together, they raise 7 children and endure 50 years of marriage. And it wasn't a fairy tale. They faced profound joys, but also devastating sorrows, including the loss of children, especially during World War I. But they navigated the whole shebang as absolute equals, supporting each other and becoming pillars of their community.
And, as a really fascinating side note here, Gilbert Blythe was actually inspired by the author L.M. Montgomery's own first love with a local farm boy. It was a relationship that ended tragically early with his death. Knowing this adds a whole layer of bittersweet reality to this perfect fictional romance, doesn't it? Montgomery essentially gave Anne the happy ending that she herself was denied in her youth.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative question. How do today's popular enemies-to-lovers romances actually compare to this 100-year-old foundational blueprint? From smashing slates over heads to a 50-year marriage built on intellectual equality and mutual sacrifice, Anne and Gilbert really set the gold standard. The next time you enjoy a modern romance, ask yourself how it measures up against the enduring magic of these two. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I hope you never underestimate the power of a really good rivalry.